Welcome to a very unique edition of the Wonderbury Podcast. I'm Dave, and normally you would hear Brian's voice right about now. But the more astute among you will have probably read the title and realized that Brian is not here this week. Brian has the COVID, and while he is recovering fairly well, his voice has decided not to cooperate so much. So between him not feeling well because of COVID and his voice being kind of out, you get me this week. Originally, the plan was going to be is we were going to release a lost episode. So when we had Chris on, it was kind of we had recorded an episode, then we decided to have Chris on, and we had this episode kind of laying around. Well, as we were digging through this week, we realized that the lost episode was so lost we couldn't find it. So instead of a lost episode, you get one half of the Wonderbury Podcast, and I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to go through our process of how we create this thing. As many of you know, Brian and I do not live in the same town. We're roughly around an hour and a half away from each other. And instead of driving and getting together and recording in the same place every week, we utilize the internet to its full potential. Well, maybe not full potential. We utilize a whole bunch of stuff to figure out what, to kind of put it all together. So we start with, Discord, actually. And there is a really cool bot in Discord called Craig. And what Craig does is it records each of us throughout a conversation. So we fire up Craig, we're in a voice chat, and it records each participant in the chat as its own audio file. And then when you're done, you make the bot go away and you get a link to where you can download the stuff that, the audio files. And we have it in the nice thing about them being separate audio files is that we can kind of manipulate them a little bit more. We can audio balance better instead of it just being one person on one side recording or the other. It allows us to balance audio out so much better. One of the benefits of that is once it gets to me, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit there. So what ends up happening is that Brian will download the audio file on his side, and he will edit the audio, output it out to an audio format that I can then take, and he uploads the entire project up to Google Drive. Once it gets up there, I can pull down the audio file for the YouTube side. So the way we've kind of broken this up is Brian he does the initial edit and manages all of the podcast side. So anywhere that's for podcasting apps or anything else in the website, he does. I maintain the YouTube side. And if you haven't seen our podcast on YouTube and yet, there's obviously a little bit more that kind of goes into it for the video stuff. And yeah, so he gets the audio up there. I end up pulling it down on my side, and I put it through OBS because it's kind of the fastest, easiest way that I have done this in my workflow so far, to add the waveform generators around each of our pictures on the YouTube video. I run it through that, then I run it into my video editor where I kind of trim off the ends and export it out and get it scheduled up on YouTube. On the other side, Brian kind of trims out the ends and gets them pushed out to the podcast side. Something that might surprise a lot of people is that we kind of shoot or record, I should say, it's not really a shoot, but we record the podcast and what I like to call live to delivery. So we don't chop a whole bunch of stuff. We don't go back through and re-record portions and bits and pieces. We just kind of sit down, start recording, and whatever comes out in the next hour-ish is what we end up throwing out to everyone out there. So what you guys kind of hear from us is all either genuine reactions, instant reactions. We've had a couple times where internet's gone out or something has happened to where we have to trim stuff out of the middle and do all that. But for the most part, we are completely, what you hear, if you were to hear us do it live, it would sound almost exactly the same as listening to it on as the finished podcast, which is kind of crazy, I guess. I've done stuff with other podcasts before where they have a lot of heavy editing, and we kind of like the way we've built this thing, I guess. We've always kind of done it just live and trim the ends and kind of shush things up a little bit. But overall, it's what you're hearing is what we've recorded as close to live as possible. The other thing that makes it kind of unique and interesting is that Brian uses everything based off of his Chromebook. He has been on this Chromebook kick for a while, and since he's not here to defend himself, I'm going to go ahead and say that I think he's insane for it, but it seems to work out pretty well. So he's got a Chromebook Duet by Lenovo that he uses. He uses Audio Evolution, which is an Android app. He has a Rode NT USB microphone that plugs right into his Chromebook, which I will say, for him to be using a USB microphone is kind of says a lot about that particular microphone. And then he's got Audio-Technica ATH-M20X headphones that can get plugged directly into the mic so that he can hear through, and we can talk about that way. And then through our website, we use Seriously Simple Podcasting to push everything out to all the podcasting stuff. That gives us a one place that we can go to look at analytics, and one place to upload one thing, and then it gets pushed out to everything else. It's a seriously really, really good tool for doing everything that we want to do with it. So he gets the audio, he balances it out, he outputs it, and he pushes it up to Google Drive. I then receive it from the Google Drive, and I download the individual audio files for myself and for Brian. And I fire up OBS, I get the files put in, and I let it run through the waveform generator that does the circles so that you can kind of have a visual aspect of who's talking, who's not. And then when that's finished up, I move that video file over to DaVinci Resolve. I use Resolve for a multitude of reasons, but even if it's something simple, I have realized that just having one single tool that I can utilize and learn, even if it's something simple like just throwing it in, trimming up the ends, and then pushing it out to where it's YouTube ready, it's kind of overkill of a tool for it, but it's what I use. Now, DaVinci also has with it something called Fusion, which is, if you use Adobe, it's like After Effects. It's more of an FX section to it. And I know Brian has asked me multiple times why I don't just use Fusion to do the waveform generator. Why do I run it through OBS with a waveform generator first and then push over to DaVinci? Well, that's because the plugin that's used with OBS is a much smaller footprint than the ones that are available for use in Resolve. And to be honest, it's just faster. Yeah, it takes me an hour to push it through OBS. Roughly, it roughly renders everything in real time. And because it renders everything through in real time, it takes, however long the episode is how long it's going to take. In DaVinci, if I were to do it, because when I was doing the testing, it would take about 3 times as long, because each of those individual waveforms has to be generated out through and through. So if I was doing 80 per, it's 160 that has to get generated for every second, and it bogs everything down. So I do it the way I do it. I have less control of it, but for what I'm using it for, it works out really well. That might change in the future as we get new pictures in and we kind of change up the look of the canvas a little bit. I might run it back through and see if I can't figure out something a little bit better. But for now, it works out really, really well for me on that side. Then once I have it that way, I export it out for YouTube. I get it pushed up and uploaded and scheduled for it to come out at noon on Sundays, about the same time the podcast is supposed to drop for everything else. And that works out. That's kind of how we run a workflow into getting a podcast from when we record, which is usually on Wednesdays, to it getting released out on a Sunday. It's kind of a multi-step process. Computer I use, I built a couple years ago, I built a Windows PC, so I just use that. I have a pretty nice microphone. It's an AKG P220 that I use for recording. It is an XLR microphone, so I have, for my digital audio converter, I have a PreSonus Revelator IO44. The reason why I use this is because it has a built-in like noise gates and equalizers and all that stuff. So that's all kind of built in and pushed back out into the machine itself. So that's kind of nice. For my headphones, I either use, depending on what kind of a mood I'm in, I either use my Shure SE215s, which are in-ear monitors by Shure, or I use my headphones, which is Logitech G933 Artemis. Kind of nice headphones. They are Atmos capable. We kind of wanted to try something later on with the YouTube side in Atmos, but I haven't dived that far into it just yet. And then one of my jobs, which I have been doing terrible at lately, is supposed to be going back through the episodes and clipping them and getting out chunks and clips for TikTok. I promise I will start doing that. I've been working on getting my kind of my schedule up and running around here, between being stay-at-home dad and keeping up with all the kids, with school and doctor's appointments and mental health appointments and all that stuff, as well as homeschooling my youngest and starting to integrate in and build up more videos on my own channel instead of just relying on live streaming, doing a lot more recorded content. So as I've been kind of figuring out what's going on and time and everything like that, I'm still working on it. We had a kind of a family emergency at the end of the year. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times. So I'm kind of back in the headspace now where I'm like, okay, I can settle in, I can get rolling with this, I can do this. It's not a terrible thing. It's just, it takes time to go through, clip everything down, but that's coming. We are going to do TikToks, YouTube shorts, and that sort of thing as I figure all that out. And time and all that. I think what we'll do is we'll probably start with the Christmas episode because that was very clippable, and we'll get stuff going. But yeah, so that's how we kind of run the podcast with being so far apart. Craig, Like I said, if you want to record with friends or do a podcast like that, and not everyone's in the same place, Discord with the Craigbot is phenomenal tool. It gives everybody out. All of the audio tracks are the exact same length, so there doesn't have to be coordination to get everything to fit properly. You just load up everything in separate tracks, and you can balance. Everything is aligned properly instantly, so there's no one is way off because someone started recording 5 minutes before everyone else. It just works out really, really well that way. But yeah, that's kind of the gear rundown and how we kind of do this, with me running off of Windows, Brian running completely off with Chrome OS and a Chromebook. It's kind of a real testament. While I will sit here and roll my eyes all day long about Chromebooks and their ability or lack of ability to do things, what they can do is a lot more than people realize. You just have to kind of be, I don't know if the right term is unique, or you have to be willing to learn new tools to work within the system versus just doing, it's one of the reasons why Brian and I can't use the same equipment to do this stuff. Is he has the Chromebook, I run off completely off Windows, and so it all kind of mashes up. And that's kind of funny because a few weeks ago we had an episode that released out that Brian's audio was completely scuffed in, and we ended up releasing it anyway. We didn't re-record anything because it would have lost all of the genuine conversation bits and everything else, which is one of the reasons why we record to live. But he had switched over to a Windows machine for that particular episode. And Discord on Windows hadn't saved all of the mic settings and all that, so he ended up recording the entire episode utilizing the internal microphone from his laptop instead of his nice one. And it's just one of those differences of, it kind of made me realize, oh, okay, so this is part of the reason why we run things a little differently than most people. And when you're used to a tool acting a certain way, that's just kind of what you're used to. It doesn't really, the tool doesn't matter. If you get too caught up in deciding on which tool to use, in the end, the tool matters the least. It's your knowledge and ability to learn the tool and to use the tool. And that same goes, I guess, for platform. I don't know if I would be able to do everything that I do on the YouTube side on a Chromebook. To be honest, I don't even want to try, because I've spent years learning certain tools, and at this point, I really don't feel like changing up my tool set. I spent a long time spent way too long trying different tools and figuring out different tools, and got caught up in well, this tool is a little bit better than this tool in this way, and these people use this tool, so I should too. I got caught up in all that way too much, and it ended up getting in the way of creativity and actually doing stuff. So that's kind of where we're at with the tools and with everything else. We did both survive the storms that came through this last week. We didn't get as much snow as I thought we were going to get. We were supposed to get, I believe they were calling for like 6 to 9 inches or some crazy thing like that. But we ended up not getting all the snow that we were supposed to. And as I'm talking, I'm trying to type in and figure out how much snow do we really get. But it did all dump pretty much all in one day. So everything is it's kind of weird um how much we actually got, what we actually ended up doing versus what was scheduled. And I'm still trying to figure this out. Okay, here we go. Looks like that Fort Wayne got, well, I guess we did get right around 6 inches of snow that dumped out pretty much all in one day. I think Brian got a little less up north than what we got because of the shape of the storm and all that. But it was the snowiest January 25th on the official record books that went back to the 1800s for Fort Wayne, Indiana. So we had 6.2 inches of snow. And it started kind of in the morning. It dumped all day. I believe this was on Wednesday. So I was trying to keep up with the shoveling. It's much later in the week when I'm recording this, just as a, I know we say we usually record on Wednesdays, but it dumped snow on Wednesday. So I was busy with going out there and shoveling multiple times each day. The roads are mostly better now. Kids' school, they had e-learning day on Wednesday and Thursday. And then today it was late getting in, as they still keep trying to keep up with the snow and get it removed out. And main roads are pretty good. Side streets are still filled with packed down snow, turning to ice. It's gotten a bit colder, but overall it's not terrible. I still have to shovel the sidewalk out front. I'm not looking forward to that. I'll probably do that once I'm done recording this, because, that's just kind of what happens. Hopefully Brian next week will be back and we can kind of pinball back and forth again. This is not going to be as long of an episode as all of our other ones. The way I figure it is you've got one half the hosts, you get one half the episode. But we are doing well. Like I said, Brian, they're dealing with COVID in the house, so he's, thoughts and prayers for him and all that fun stuff that everybody says that's kind of cliched at this point. But, COVID's no joke. He seems to be doing all right. All things considered, he's doing all right. He's not in the hospital. We're not too worried about that kind of thing right now. His voice just was out. And, you're that sick and you've got the kind of fever, you just don't want to get on a podcast and record for an hour. That's no fun. That's no way of spending your week when you're supposed to be recovering. So we're going to evaluate for next week. We should know Monday or Tuesday whether or not how he's probably going to be feeling. So either next week there will be me and a special guest, or it'll be me and Brian. Hopefully Brian will be back. Brian, we wish you well, buddy. Hope you get through this, get over this. Hope the family survives it all right. But yeah, we got everything down. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover today. And we talked about the process of actually building this thing. I know it's kind of a weird episode, and I know that we've kind of hinted at, but haven't really gone in depth of how we build these things. And I know that a couple of people have asked me, how do you guys do this? And I think Chris was kind of surprised at how live to release that we kind of actually go versus recording segments, chopping things up, cutting things down, all that fun stuff. I think my background of doing live streaming for even just as a hobby for as long as I have, I've just gotten used to, you hit record or you hit go live and you just go. And you ebb and flow with what you need to ebb and flow with. You deal with what comes up. And it just all kind of comes together as you learn how to talk constantly and constantly and constantly. Kind of like what I'm doing now. I'm just rambling about nothing. So I'll leave you guys out. This is just under half an hour. Like I said, we're between 45 minutes and an hour usually in a podcast. So you get all the wonder, a lot less Barry. Hopefully next week we'll be back to Wonderbury. Thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for the messages. Just thanks for listening or watching or however you consume us. It's awesome. Wonderbury.com. Wonderbury on every major platform. Wonderbury on YouTube. If you want to check out the little bit added stuff that I do for the video, which just kind of gives it a little bit of texture for an audio podcast, which is somewhat weird and somewhat crazy, but hey, it works. You can also see all the older stuff that we did way back when on there. And hopefully next week you'll hear Brian's wonderful voice and dad jokes back into it. And we will return you to your regular scheduled programming. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening and tuning in this week. Until next week, be safe out there.